Mr. President, and I too would like to speak on this National Defense Authorization Act and observe that we just, I think, had a very important exchange between the distinguished chairman of the Armed Services Committee and the senator from Illinois. They disagree on an amendment that will actually not be voted on, but I was struck by the senator from Illinois' remarks and would observe to my colleagues that he has made a compelling case in favor of the bill, which I appreciate, and in favor of the proposition that the President of the United States should in fact sign this bill. So I appreciate my colleague from Illinois pointing that out, and I hope that people at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue in the Oval Office even are listening to the stirring defense of the legislation from the senator from Illinois. We are indeed moving in the right direction on this bill. I came to the floor last week to talk about the importance of this act. I reminded my colleagues at the time that this has always been a bipartisan matter. For some 53 years, this Senate, people who've come long before me, have supported this particular bill on a bipartisan basis, and that is as it should be. I also disagreed strongly in my remarks last week with the remarks of the distinguished minority leader, the senator from Nevada, who said that taking up this bill was a waste of time because the president had stated his intention to veto the bill. I made the point at that time that the success of our nation's premier defense bill can never be a waste of time. Taking care of the troops, taking care of the men and women who've stepped forward as volunteers can never be considered a waste of time. And I think really more and more of our colleagues are coming around to that conclusion. We have made so much progress in the weeks we've been dealing with this. And I would remind my colleagues that we started off in the Armed Services Committee with a complete partisan divide. It was troubling at the time, but we've recovered from that. When we began consideration of this bill in the Senate Armed Services Committee, we were told every Republican would vote aye and every Democrat would vote no. And that was definitely a concern to those of us who know this has to be bipartisan, that national security has got to be something that has the support from both sides of the aisle. As we worked through the process, as the distinguished ranking member, the senator from Rhode Island, worked with the chairman of the committee, Senator McCain, we gained more and more support for this legislation in committee. And at the end of the day, only 4 members of the entire committee voted no. So the vote was 22 in favor and only 4 opposed in the committee, again, moving in the right direction. And we get to the floor last week and we hear the statements that this is a waste of time. I think we're moving away from that. And indeed, yesterday, we voted on cloture on the bill. Now, I have in my hand a very, very, I think, encouraging vote of 83 senators in favor of this bill on a bipartisan, of this motion for cloture, 83 in favor and only 15 opposed. So at the beginning of my brief remarks today, I would just say that it is encouraging to me that both at the committee level and also on the Senate floor, we are getting to where the Senate has always been on this bipartisan issue. And we certainly need to. We need to authorize the best tools available for our troops, the best training available for our troops, and our veterans, as the distinguished senator from Illinois just pointed out, are in need of the support that this bill gives them. In addition, Mr. President, our veterans are ready for much needed reforms to improve retirement and to improve military benefits. And of course, we live in a very, very unstable and insecure world, and we need this bill to meet the threats that are out there. We wish they weren't there. I wish that things were better in Iraq. I wish that our hard-fought gains had not been tossed away by our precipitate withdrawal. But in fact, the situation has worsened in Iraq, and we need this bill to protect our interests there. We face old Cold War tensions with a reassertive and aggressive Russia in the form of President Vladimir Putin, increasingly intent on restoring the Soviet Empire. We face other realities: cyber terrorism, the nuclear ambitions of Iran, which we've heard so much about recently, and we need to reaffirm that the United States has a capable and strong U.S. defense. Now let me, for a brief few moments, come home to my state of Mississippi and say why people in my state feel so strongly about this. Of course, we have military bases from north to south in Mississippi. Our own Mississippians, like in all of our states, have stepped forward and are volunteering and are serving capably. But also, we manufacture so many things in my state of Mississippi that are important for national security. Unmanned aerial vehicles, we make them in Mississippi. Some of the finest ships in the world are made on the Gulf Coast of Mississippi. Helicopters, radars, and other electronic warfare technology. All of these are manufactured in my home state. And so for people in Mississippi, I think this talk of this bill, these weeks on the floor being a waste of time, do not ring true. A few examples here. In my hometown of Tupelo, Mississippi, this bill recognizes the importance of the Army's Apache helicopters and the Tupelo Army Aviation Support Facility. At Columbus Air Force Base, where over 2,000 personnel serve, this bill and the Defense Appropriation Bill, which the gentlelady from Maryland may speak about in a few moments, these pieces of legislation allow our student pilots to have adequate training and adequate flying training hours. In Starkville, Mississippi, the authorization and appropriation bills are integral to completing the Army Reserve Center for equipping and training military personnel. And along the Gulf Coast, these defense bills, the authorization and the appropriation bill, would support a new Army National Guard aviation depot at the Gulfport Biloxi Airport, as well as the continued mission of over 11,000 Americans who work at Keesler Air Force Base. I'm proud of these, and I'm proud of what they do for our overall national defense of the United States. Mississippi is just one of many states to take part in this. Simply put, Mr. President, the future of our defense should not be put in jeopardy because of disagreements about unrealistic domestic funding issues. We can get to those issues, but defending the United States of America is something only the federal government can do. We can't devolve national defense down to the states or communities. We have to do it here in this building, in this body, on this floor of the United States Senate. And besides, I think it's well worth saying and reminding my colleagues that this bill gives the president every penny he has requested for national defense. It meets the $612 billion requested by President Obama in his budget. So it really should not be partisan at all. And I would go back to what the senator from Illinois said. He made a stirring defense of this legislation, I think one that should be listened to by the President of the United States. He should listen to the fact that we have an 83-15 vote on cloture. We had a 22-4 vote in the Appropriations Committee. We've had a few partisan flare-ups along the course of this legislation. But I think as we get to the end of the day, I am more and more encouraged about the prospects of this bill. I think we can pass it tomorrow with an overwhelming vote which shows that we are voting for it not as Republicans, not as Democrats, but as Americans, because we want to defend the vital national interest of the United States of America. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.